Podium Publishing presents The Runner, a Silo story. Written by W.J. Davies. Read by Chris Patton. One. Ace lowered himself into the frigid water as echoes of squealing children drifted down the stairwell. Their excited trills drowned out his thundering heartbeat, making him yearn for such carefree days. A splash erupted from the murky surface. The children went silent. Ace peered toward the source of the disturbance and saw a porcelain doll bobbing up and down amid the ripples, its expression blank, almost peaceful, before it slipped beneath the water. Another casualty of the Great Flood. Those kids had better be careful, he thought, or it'll be more than a doll tumbling down the stairwell. Ace's new diving partner angled into view above him and held out a long rubber tube. "You sure you don't want the air hose today, boss?" Tommy asked. Ace wasn't really his boss, but among the divers, he'd been around the longest. Although he refused to rely on that unreliable tube to supply his air, he was one of the few original divers who hadn't yet drowned in the silo's flooded depths. "No thanks, Tommy. Not today." Not ever, he thought bitterly. He'd seen too many kinked hoses, watched too many young men and women give their lives to the flood. Countless times he'd had to pull able bodies from the water and zip them into black bags, only to pass them on to porters, who would haul the corpses up to feed the roots of the dirt farms. Ace checked his utility belt to make sure his wrenches and crowbars were secure. When satisfied, he pushed himself away from the partially submerged landing and paddled into the middle of the lake, trying to visualize what lay beneath him. "See you in 6 minutes, boss?" "I'm going for 7 today," Ace replied. "Yesterday I hit 6.5 and I had a bit left in me." He slowed his breathing, preparing for the dive. "But hey, don't wait up for me, all right?" He gave his partner a wink as he began bobbing up and down in the water, each bob taking him further down, and then higher up than the last. He timed his breaths in a rhythm, inhaling deeper and exhaling more air each time. Tommy hit the switch that activated the spotlights suspended above the pool, causing Ace to squint against the sudden brightness. "See you in 6, Tommy said, forgetting or not wanting to believe that Ace was willing to push for 7 minutes. "Good hunting down there." Ace kicked his feet as hard as he could while inhaling the largest breath his lungs could muster. He performed a graceful half-twist as gravity and acceleration pulled his body down. The shock was immediate as his head broke the surface of the cold water, but this was nothing he wasn't used to. The suffocating press of water that terrified most others had become part of his daily routine. Alone in these silent depths, his dives were the only thing that got him through the day, the only thing that gave his life purpose anymore. Ace thrust his legs away from the surface, pushed his arms in sweeping arcs, and was careful not to let the slightest mouthful of air escape as he descended. The glare from the spotlights refracted through the shimmering green water, and as he swam through the shadows, he noted that the further down he got, the more sludge clung to the metal stairs, the more algae coated the walls, like gossamery spider thread. He was amazed at how much plant life grew down here. Strands of hair-like seaweed swayed against a gentle current, flourishing in the same water that had destroyed so many lives. This was the 5th year since the flooding had begun, and the 5th year since Mick had been sent cleaning, swallowed by the great outside. But it wasn't the outside that killed him, Ace reminded himself. It had been those inside the silo who had had a message to send. Ace grimaced, thinking back to that horrific day. Some memories were too painful to forget, but even if Ace could forget, he wasn't sure if he'd want to. Red paint, peeling like rotting flesh, knocked Ace out of his gloomy reverie. 98, it read. It had been about 2 minutes since he'd gone under, and his lungs combated the effects of oxygen depletion that would plague a less experienced diver. The door to 98 was already open, the result of yesterday's dive, and as Ace pulled himself through, he lost most of the light which filtered down from above. He reached up and flipped on his headlamp, illuminating an abandoned hall, brown scum flaking off walls and swirling like motes of dust in his wake. He came to a T at the end of the hallway, turned his head down each corridor, and then chose one at random. 3 minutes. Ace swam down the hall as far as he dared and began working on one of the doors. He tried the handle first, but of course it didn't budge. They never did this far submerged. He pulled a carbon crowbar from his belt and worked it into the slot of the door. He punched the end of it outward and felt the door pop as it came ajar, bracing himself as he released the handle. Gravity welcomed the water into the previously empty apartment, creating a torrent around him. Bubbles poured out angrily, distressed for being disturbed after so long, and collected along the top of the hall. He swam up and put his lips into the tiny pocket of trapped air, taking a small, testing breath. It was good air. He emptied his lungs of stale oxygen and then went back for a refill, adding 5 minutes to his mental clock. Ace smiled to himself. Tommy is going to have a conniption fit if I'm not back soon. But Ace knew he wouldn't always get so lucky. Sometimes the air in these rooms didn't add to his time underwater at all. Either it had been deprived of its oxygen by fire, or worst case, decomposing bodies inside the apartments made the air unbreathable. He continued back along the way he'd come, opening 6 doors until the current became nearly too strong to fight. Only 2 of the apartments had contained good air, the rest affording nothing but the space into which the water would flow. Each apartment lowered the flood line a foot, 2 feet if they were lucky. This was his mantra as he worked. Flood the apartments, gain back the silo. He paused at the last door. It was larger than the rest, and he struggled to remember what was behind it. There wasn't always a pattern to the levels of the silo. The creators hadn't made a uniform design. But he was feeling giddy, perhaps from the lack of O2, so he decided to try his luck. This door required no crowbar, but he jammed his foot against the door frame and used his wrench to latch onto the great wheel on the front of it. After a few heaves, he was able to shake the wheel loose. He turned and turned until finally the door gave a start. He felt it pulling away from him and braced his foot against the wall. It took a lot of energy to keep the door from swinging inward, and he thought of all the glorious air pressure trapped in the spacious chamber beyond. All the feet of reclaimed silo this would grant them. With a massive shove, he kicked away from the frame as he let the wheel go. A muffled bang rang out as the door crashed into the wall inside the room. He turned toward the entrance of the level, pumping his legs. But something was wrong. As hard as he swam, he wasn't moving. He had just enough strength to keep himself in the same place as water rushed past him to fill the large cavern he had exposed. Shit, how long until the current stops? He knew he didn't have time to find out. He hadn't found clean air in nearly 5 minutes, and his lungs were beginning to burn. Ace thought of Tommy, pacing in circles far above, likely holding the air hose that could save his life. But to hell if he was going to rely on those stinking windpipes to keep him alive. The pipes. He glanced up and his headlamp illuminated tracks of rusty pipes running along the ceiling. Yes, if only he could grab onto one. He tried swimming upward, but the current held him in place. He kicked furiously, which was dangerous because he could feel his lungs trying to take a breath, pleading with him to open his mouth and inhale. Inch by hard-fought inch, Ace worked his way up toward the ceiling as water grabbed at him, grimy fingers pulling him into an icy tomb. He grasped out with flailing hands and felt himself getting dizzy. In a last-ditch attempt, his fingers connected with the pipe, and he latched onto it. With enormous effort, he hauled himself hand over hand toward the great stairwell. Spots appeared before his eyes, tiny white lights floating across his vision. He wasn't going to make it. Not this time. He'd pushed his luck too far, tried to open one too many doors. Oh well, it wasn't much of a life anyway. Not with Mick gone, the only person he'd ever cared about. Even so, he pulled himself along, aware that it was just his body's survival instincts forcing him onward, overpowering his mind's waning desire to keep alive. Finally, he reached the open water and felt the current slow to an imperceptible tug, like a distant magnet losing its charge. But a quick look up to the faraway surface assured him that he wasn't going to make it. He kicked his legs and perhaps rose a few feet, but the pain in his lungs was too severe. His body did automatically what his mind had been struggling to avoid. Ace spasmed and inhaled an enormous lungful of water, coughing, which did not make for a pleasant experience underwater. This was it. Over. Done. No more diving. No more life.